Maybe taking a step back and thinking about these agents, right? And why is it so hard to make them work? And why is the graveyard still, populating itself fast? Is because there's a lot of unknown pieces. So think of an analogy, right? I don't know if you ever built things, with Raspberry Pi or with, Mars rovers. I have a young son, so we're building a Mars rover, which is essentially a Raspberry Pi, which connects to a bunch of sensors, a microphone, a camera, and a memory chip, so you can see sort of what its path is. And for me, if I take this to the world of Gen AI, what we basically have today with these powerful Gen AI models, large language models, is just the reasoning engine, is basically the Raspberry Pi without anything else, right? And that was the LLM. And now in the agentic world, we're trying to figure out, how do you put this into a system that can interact with the world, right? That can actually understand, what history of interactions it had. So memory, like this Mars rover needs to know what's its path. Where does it need to go? It needs to maybe be able to take actions and, decide to go left or right. In the agentic world, I need to access an API to fetch information, or I need to store, create a file and store it somewhere.
It needs wheels.
That's it. So, and the tools are part of it, because that gives the LM the ability to interact with data that's up to date, because of course, what the data it's seen as it during training time, has a sort of endpoint.
Very different, yeah.
So you need, other data, maybe that's proprietary data or data related to, something that happened today. It may need to actually generate its own data, to not just read but also write, because it knows that you and I are interacting and you've asked me certain types of questions over time. So that needs to be stored in memory.
Yeah.
When does that memory get accessed? Then when it generates an answer, it may want to actually think and critique that answer. So it's not just a one-shot token prediction, but it generates a plan based on what you're asking it to do. It can go to that plan, critique it, look at the end of the steps it's followed, whether that plan materialized, go back to a step and revise. So that entire system is what you need to have working, not just once, but reliably, especially if you're going to ship it to real customers in production and so on. And that's been the journey we've been on, right? And but it's the journey has been moving from a small unit of reasoning, the LLM,
the Raspberry Pi,
the Raspberry Pi, that now needs to be reliably connected to all these other pieces, so it can help with much more sophisticated tasks. And in fact, that's the promise, right? So moving from just a simple Q&A device to something that can, actually help with much more sophisticated, complex tasks, especially in the e-commerce journey. In our ecosystem at Pros, there's a ton of opportunity to do that.
The Raspberry Pi to the Mars rover. That's what we're doing right now. I like that metaphor. And there are some specific difficulties that arise when you start doing that. I think two things that we wanted to call out, especially right now, are evaluation can be really difficult. And you're looking at latency requirements, and then cost too.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, if you're doing all of these LLM calls, it can add up quickly. And we're going to go over all that fun stuff later on in different episodes and break down specifically how you can do evaluation and what you can look for. But now we should probably talk about the different ways that you can use agents, or that agents manifest. I think we could call it, because back to that conference, we saw lots of different ways that agents are being used. And in a broad sense, I kind of bucket agents into, you have agents that are like the computer use agents that came out from Anthropic, and it can use your whole computer and take over.
Yeah.
You have web agents, which are a little bit more of a intermediary between, they're not using your whole computer, but they're using your browser.
Right.
And then you have agents that are interacting with the world through APIs, which I think is probably the most common design pattern these days. And then you also can have voice AI agents. And so interacting with an agent that you're talking to on the phone or maybe on a Zoom call, there's probably room for us to throw in there like agents that you see in video games, NPCs maybe. I don't know if you want to call that a full-blown agent, but it feels like that could be one also.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're describing the spectrum of complexity, and I think it also gives us a sense of where we're headed in the future. Some of it was very near. So indeed, the natural first set of tools that you want to give these agents to are APIs, because they're well documented, well structured. You know what needs to go in, what you expect back. You can test against that. It makes evaluation a lot easier. So that's the first thing, that if, the agents in production that we are working with are typically going to be, using well-defined APIs that are, fairly simple compared to doing, let's say, more open-ended web browsing, for example. Of course, we're testing, and, we can share what we've learned and why that's also, very hard and more expensive and takes time.
We're going to have a whole episode on web agents. And so Chiara is going to come and be our resident expert, because that's the fun thing too, that we should mention. We get to pull from all the folks that are working at Prosus who are doing deep dives on each one of these topics, and they get to come and tell us what they've learned over the past 6 months, just focusing only on that.
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. And I think if you walk along the sort of levels of sophistication, we need a framework for this. So I don't know, maybe somebody's come up with what are these sort of levels of complexities for agents, but from APIs to browsing, and just in these two levels, if we call them that way, there's so much opportunity still to make these things work. I mean, in the world of e-commerce, online marketplaces, platforms, there's so many things that if you just can give an agent access to the web, to the app, to the APIs, that they can help you with. All of a sudden, think of booking trips, ordering food, helping you pick products and so on. Let's say after web browsing, the next thing is sort of just giving them access to a computer, a desktop. And we're working with, various companies, startups out there that do exactly that. And you can see the progress, like on benchmarks like OS World and so on, that these agents can now, basically create pivot tables for you. They can, with very brief instructions, right? Or they can download files, they can process them, and so on. And that is going to come soon, 2025, probably give us, a whole bunch of new exciting things and products on that front. Then if you go one step further, they can start interacting with the real world, right? So robotics.
Yeah, that's another agent that I didn't even talk about. That's true.
So that's sort of the levels of sophistication that I think we expect to kind of see maturing over the next, months, quarters. Sometimes things go faster.
There's some prime real estate for some real thought leadership there with that map of the difficulties.
Let's do it. They're volunteers.
So one thing that we didn't really talk about is why use agents, and why not just use traditional methods, because it seems like we add a lot of complexity. There is that benefit of, hey, I can just tell something to go do it and it'll do it for me. But a lot of times you end up banging your head against the wall because it is so difficult.
I think the simple answer is that you just add so many more possibilities that you can, or tasks that you can have these systems do for you. Once you move to an agentic world, you give them access to tools. That it's the obvious next thing to do, because we've kind of gone through the question answer world, and we're doing that, and sure, they're all, these AI assistants are part of our lives now, and they do that reasonably well. Of course, there's a ton of room for improvement, but as they become agentic, there's many more things they can do. And then again, at Prosus, we're a large ecosystem of companies that help our users do things easier, better, faster as they interact with our e-commerce platforms. We see that the agentic capabilities allow us to do much more on that front. So, and by the way, I will also say that one of the things you notice, and we'll talk about what we learn as you try to apply this to the current systems, is that the world is not ready, or it hasn't been made for the agentic systems, right? The interfaces, the APIs, sure they exist, but they're not made for agents to interact with them.
Well, they break all the time too. It's really hard to get a very trustworthy API that, even just for weather, a weather API that you can go looking and just getting that, which you would think is a solved problem and is simple, that's hard. And so trying to go a few steps deeper and get more complex APIs, or each API is different, and it's constantly changing.
Right.
And if you're not up to date with those changes or making sure that you have some way to keep your agents up to date, then you're looking at a whole world of hurt.
That's right.
Preaching to the choir right here.